Got a Sony SLV-R1000 sent in from a viewer. This one's got the blue gear problem that we've done before, but this one also has another problem. It's got a problem with the capstan motor, which we found out after replacing the blue gear. So I'm going to show you how to fix that problem too, because the part for that is even harder to find, but it can be fixed really simple. Watch. This is a Sony SLV-R1000. Before I even plug this one in, we're going to pop it apart, see if there's any mechanical problems. These machines were prone to the loading gear, the blue loading gear, breaking on them. So I want to check to make sure that that's not broken before powering it up, as to avoid any further damage. And if the gear is broken, I'll have to get one, as I don't currently have one in stock. I'll have to order one in, and then we'll proceed to work on this unit. And the guide is broken, therefore, or the guide is loose, I should say, therefore the blue gear is broken on this one. I'll have to get one in stock, and then we can work on this one. Got the part in for the SLV-R1000, the left threading gear, so let's proceed with changing that and see if there's anything else that's wrong with this one while we're at it. So we need to remove the chassis to work on these ones. So we start by removing the front faceplate. It just pops off on these ones if I'm not mistaken. I should know I've done enough of these things. It's just been a while since I've worked on one. It should just lift off the front. Just like that. We'll unplug this interconnect. Next, I want to remove the screws that hold the chassis, and I need to undo some cables, some interconnects. I got to take off these ones are held in place with a fabric type tape, so these ones are going to have to be undone. So we'll take the tape off of them first. Then we can pop open the clips, power connectors like that, and we're going to remove the head wire and the erase head plug. And the free up some slack so I can release the wire from underneath that clip, and then I can unplug the head. Now we're going to remove the screws that hold the chassis in place. And what else is holding this chassis in? A couple more screws, I believe. one more. And now the whole mechanism should lift out, I think. I think it'll lift out now. Oh, there's one more screw back here. That one last screw there. And then this little tab will bend up out of the way to free the chassis, so the chassis can lift out. And just like that. And what's holding it? There is a wire at the bottom here. I gotta unplug. There we go. There's the chassis out. The remnants of the old gears there, the blue gear that broke. Incidentally, if this wire gets hung up, which this one was, it was hung up behind here, it's actually the drum motor plug. So if that gets hung up, just plug it back in. Just like that. Sometimes they get hung up. They're usually supposed to be tucked in, like under here. But sometimes they get hung up on one of the pieces of plastic in the back here, and that's what happened in this case. It got hung up underneath here and it got detached. That's where that goes. If you wonder, that's where it goes. Plugs in right there. Okay, we're gonna get the unit out of the way so that I can, or the main chassis out of the way, so I can focus on the mechanism and changing that gear. So first we need to remove the circuit board. Here's the blue gear that's broken, that breaks in all of these machines. To say, it is easy to replace. It is readily available. Comes from KP Components out here in the lower mainland. Unfortunately, I can't just go and buy my parts from him anymore because he only offers a mail order, which means that the price has gone up because I have to pay for shipping. But that's the way it is. So first we'll just remove the 3 retaining washers, and then remove the metal plate. We're now going to remove the cam gear. Now remember that this is timing critical. There are timing marks that line up. There are basically holes that go right through the chassis, and you can find my little green handled screwdriver right here. You'll see that this will go right down through the chassis. That's how these things were done at the factory. That hole lines up, and this hole here will also line up, and this one here right? There's a hole that goes down through here and it goes right down through this slide cam. This is how you know your timing is correct. But we don't have to worry too much about this part because we're not taking this part apart. All we care about is this side. There's three cams on this gear, and you can see them right here, here, and here, and they are visible through these three holes. If you are nervous about the position of the gear and you're not so sure about where things should be before you take it apart, do yourself a favor and mark the parts. Right? Draw a line. Mark the parts so that you know where things are before you take it apart. I don't generally do that because I know where they go and I know where the alignment holes are. But if you're unsure, just put a little mark on the parts that can shift, because we're going to take this mode switch out as well and clean it once I'm done. Okay, holding the mechanism in place. Hold the gear down so it doesn't pop out. Just lift your cam gear out like that. We're going to also want to inspect the cam gear and see if there's any chewed up teeth on here, which there's not, which I wouldn't expect. And we also inspect this main slide, this main cam, to see if any of these teeth are broken, which there are not. All these other little levers also have holes below that line up, right? You can see right through there, see through there. They all have alignment holes, because these machines were all assembled by machine, and when the mechanism went together, the chassis was basically put on a peg stick, right? A chassis, a jig with pegs, had pins that went through, and then the gears were put in place until they dropped into place. And once they were all dropped into place, the plate went on, the washers went into place, and then the machine was removed off the assembly line. It was all done by machines. So that's why they got all these alignment holes, because human hands didn't touch this machine when they were assembled. These were all done by robots. Okay, now we're going to remove the broken gear. We'll just take this guide and move it out of the way for now, just so that we have a little bit of clearance. Remove this other washer, and we're going to remove the broken part of the gear. Now I can remove the entire, and I think I will, I'll remove the entire guide. So I'm going to remove this other washer. When I do that, the guide's going to fall off. This is a cut washer, so look for the split. And just pop it up, pop it open, and lift it off. Be careful that it doesn't fly away. These other ones are not cut washers, but this one is. Now that I've got that removed, I can remove the gear with the metal arm attached. You got to put this spring onto the new gear. The spring locks in place one side of the spring in behind this cog here. To release this gear, we have to turn it so that the little catch is over the recess or the opening, and then it will just lift off just like that. And the new gear can go into place exactly the same way. It goes in place just like that. But we do have to get this spring into this groove here. If you take the gear off, we're going to put the spring in like that, right? So that the spring is sitting in the groove and the other end of the spring is over here. Then we need to take this piece, we're going to put this piece on the metal arm, and we're going to lock this cog into the spring like that, and then we just have to slowly rotate it under tension until it will slide back in a proper position, just like that. Okay, now the gear is set and the spring is in position. Now we can proceed to reassemble the machine. And how we do that is we put the gear back into place. Now these are timed, so they have to get them in the right place. So we'll start with the mechanism fully in the loaded position. I'm going to lift up this one because this one has to slide underneath it. What we're trying to line up is this half alignment post with our alignment hole with this hole here. lift it up enough so that you can get the guide into position, slide it down, and then we're going to slide the two gears down together so that they line up. Now if I pull the guides back, go back like that. When we line them up, there should be two little arrows. There'll be an arrow here and it's pointing at, should be another little arrow, it's hard to see, but there should be another little arrow on this side here. I think it's right there. Yeah, there it is. I don't know how good it comes across on camera, but the arrow is, I'll mark it black. It's right there. Okay, you can see it. Now you probably can see the indentation. So those are going to line up when we're in the right position, which we are not. So I'm just going to lift this up and move one cog back. So now the two of them are pointing at each other, you see? Now we're lined up. Now if I move this all the way forward, we should be pretty close. It's back all the way. We're all the way in the fully unloaded position. This hole will line up with a hole in the bottom of the chassis. You can see the hole there. That hole lines up with the bottom of the chassis, and this one over here lines up with a hole over there. So when we're fully loaded, these two are not quite lined up with each other, but they're close. Our alignment position is all the way back. That little arrow there is pointing at the other little arrow. You see? That one is pointing at that one. This alignment hole is lining up with the alignment hole in the chassis below, and this one here is lining up with that one. That part is now correct, so we can put back on that part of the washer. We can reinstall the guide as well, so we're going to tip it back over and push the guide back into place. We got to make sure that the back tension band is, our back tension arm is in its correct position before we reinstall the guide, because the guide pulls it down with it. And now I can go back to this side while holding the guide in place, put the cut washer back on to lock the guide onto its control arm. Now we have the mechanism timed. I can then reinstall the cam gear. Remember, I marked it, but I didn't have to because there are timing marks. We want to make sure that these levers are all in the correct position, and they're going to line up with the holes below the chassis. So that one, if it's like that, is not correct because that will not line up with that hole, right? Screwdriver can go down through the holes when you're in the correct position, like that. And this one here is like that. But we'll see the pins lining up through these holes. So guides back in place, cam gear in place, and then we're going to rock these arms, these levers, to seat them. Like that. And this one and this one here. And push it into place, and the gear will drop into place when we're in the right position. If it doesn't, check the positioning of different things, make sure that everything's in the right position, and try again. I'm lining up the pins here. I'm lining up that hole with that pin, that hole with the hole below there. This was off by a little bit, by the way. So even though I marked it in the incorrect position because it was off by a half of a tooth. all lined up. You can see the hole here. You can see that one. Find something finer to push through there so you guys can see it. Probably be better. So we can push our wire down through here and it'll go right down through the chassis. See? That alignment's good. This one here, there should be a hole. Is there a hole down there on that one? This one here for sure, right? Go right down through the chassis. And you see the three lining up. And our timing marks are lining up here. Timing marks lining up there. You can see that one through there. We're looking good. So now, reinstall the base plate and put the three washers back on. Oops. Okay, mechanism is now back together. One last thing we should do on this, well, we've got it apart, because this is something you should do on all VCRs when you're working on them, is do the mode switch. So 2 screws. And I'm going to release the tension on this one. That way I can remove the belt. That way it gets it out of the way. And then the mode switch will just lift off. Mode switch on these come apart quite easy. Just squeeze the pins together in the middle, the spindle, and the mode switch will pop apart. And there it is, in all its glory, ready for some deoxit to clean it up. I'm going to use some deoxit D100, which was 100% solution. This stuff's safe on plastics. It dissolves corrosion, improves contacts, and protects surfaces. I'll just put some of this on these contacts, and I'm going to use the mechanical action of the applicator to just give it a light rub to break through any corrosion, and we're going to leave this on the contacts. I could swab this with a Q-tip, but it's not really necessary because the action of the switch will polish these contacts up quite nicely. I just lightly rub the surface with the metal tip, and that'll break through any oxidation that's on there. Put the switch back together and spin it several times. The action of the switch contacts will clean the actual switch itself. The back here, it's got a good dose of oxidation on it. You can see it. So we're just going to give these ones a scrape and a clean. Reinstall the mode switch. Even though I did mark it, I kind of rubbed the ink off, but there's a hole. There's a little timing mark right there. You can see it. There's a little hole on there. Not a hole, but a little mark. And that lines up with this arrow here. So the arrow is going to point at the timing mark right there. You can see the two of them lining up now. There's the hole and there's the arrow. Just like that. And then I have to remove one of these levers has got to move to drop this in place, it's this lever here. Move that, which is the one that's got the little pink arm on it. And once it's in position, it will drop into position. If you move it, you'll see the lever moving. So there's the alignment, there's the hole, timing mark, and there's the little arrow. It indicates that everything is good. 2 screws to hold the mode switch in place. I never really understood why Sony did this. If you look at the tooth belt here, it's got this spring on there, but it's also got a lock screw. You wonder why bother with that? Well, that just puts it under the correct tension. The spring's not really doing anything because once you tighten down the screw, it's never going to move, right? This is kind of a redundant part. It's not even needed. The only reason that spring is there is to get the correct tension on the belt before you tighten down the screw. I guess also so that if the screw were to ever work its way loose, it would keep the belt under tension. But it's kind of a redundant, unnecessary part, but it's there. Okay, now I can put the circuit board back on. We're going to line up the tape end sensors and the IR emitter in the appropriate holes. And then push the plugs into position. It'll lock the plugs in for the mode switch, the capstan motor, and the loading motor. You'll feel them snap into place, and then it's just a matter of putting the screws back in to hold the board in place. And those other clips will also lock in here as well. And get it snapped into place. That's that clip and this one over here. Okay, now it's time to reassemble the unit. I'm going to grab the main chassis. Chassis is back in place. There it goes. I hear something ticking. What is that ticking sound I hear? I believe that ticking sound might be the pinch roller. Could be the bearing on the pinch roller. Let's just see. It's either the pinch roller or the capstan motor. Oh, it's the capstan motor. It's the capstan bearing starting to... Yeah, I can feel it. Okay, so let's just try the little fix for this. A lot of these capstan bearings, they bent just from the pressure of the pinch roller. This is the supposedly stronger version, but they still fail. So what we got to do on these when this happens, so we got to try and straighten it up a bit. I'm going to remove the pinch roller. Take the top off here. Where the screw is for this thing, just so that it's out of the way. So I can remove the pinch roller and get it out of the way. We're just going to put pliers on here. We're just going to give this thing a bit of a torque forward, just a bit, and then put the pinch roller back on. There's not a heck of a lot you can do about that because these bearing pieces are pretty much unobtainable these days. But we did change tons and tons and tons of these things. And even though they said that the new ones were stronger, they may have been stronger than the copper colored ones, but they still after a while fail. And what happens is the rotor actually starts touching up against the stator. See? Now it's quiet. No more tick, 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 tick. What happens when that piece bends and the rotor starts making contact with the because the rotors themselves are never perfectly, like the magnet itself is never perfectly flat. It's pretty damn close, but there's always a slight amount of wobble in the magnet. So if you were to look at it, it's always going to move a little bit like this. And when this bearing starts to bend, and it always bends in this direction because the pressure from the pinch roller is pushing against the bearing in that direction. So what happens is when the rotor, which is on the bottom side, starts to make contact with the coil every time it rotates, and you'll start to hear this sound. It will eventually get worse to the point where when you're using the EP speed, it'll actually cause the motor to stall out momentarily and your picture will kind of freeze momentarily. And Sony came out with a stronger bearing, and this is the stronger bearing. The ones that are silver colored are stronger. The ones that were the brass are I guess they were copper, like a copper colored, like this, this type of metal here. They were that color. Those ones failed the quickest, and they came out with a stronger bearing to replace it, because replacing the whole motor was very cost prohibitive. Motor was $100 for the motor. The bearing itself was about $10 or $12 for the bearing. Anyway, we'd find that even the replacement ones, they would start to go bad in heavy used Sonys. So we started coming up with our own way of fixing them. Just put a pair of pliers on it and give it a bit of a pull towards you. Take the wow out of it, the bow out of it. Bend it back, and aluminum bends easy, right? Bend it back and solve the problem. So here's the picture on this one. This unit is now ready to go back to its owner. As soon as he pays me for it, I'll be shipping this one back to him. We're going to clean the heads on this one and then finish up. So take the tape out. one a good little head cleaning. That's actually pretty clean, that machine. Clean the rest of the rollers and so forth. I hear a timer going off in the house. I have a feeling that my dinner is ready. Perfect timing. I just worked on my old JVC. Is it 7300? I think it was the model number. 1982 top loader. Had a viewer actually want it, and they're asking if I knew where they could get an old top loader VCR, like an early 80s VCR. And I said, well, I just happen to have one. I hauled it out. I haven't turned it on in like 5 years since I serviced it the first time, and one of the belts had kind of got a bit sloppy. It didn't stretch or anything. It just was slipping. And found a new belt for it, and it's on its way to the States. Actually, it hasn't left yet. It's sitting in the corner in a box. We're taking it up and mailing it tomorrow. But yeah, someone's getting a nice old vintage top loader. Try and find one of those around these days. There aren't any. But yeah, getting a nice old vintage top loader. Let's try a Super VHS tape in this one, and then I'll send this one on its way. Good old Panasonic ST60. A real Super VHS tape. Index hole. This has got some stuff I shot on it at the Vancouver Aquarium. And this would have been shot, it's probably a second generation, I'm sure, but this would have been shot with a Panasonic PVS 350. Well, the first of the Super VHS cameras, but the fact that this has got a hi-fi soundtrack on it tells me that this is not the original tape. This is a copy, but here it is playing in Super VHS. And there it is. And this will have dubbed sound, so I won't be able to play the sound, but we'll turn it on. Can't play that. Andreas Wallenweider on his electric harp as music I put on when I did this thing years and years and years ago. Anyway, that's it for this one. All done. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one real soon. Bye for now. I do have to say, for a tape that was recorded back in the 1980s, this actually looks pretty good.